In the heart of the galaxy's grandest courtroom, one human stood alone, silent, still, and surrounded by thousands who expected her to break. She was outnumbered, overpowered, and on trial for defying the most powerful species in the cosmos. But as the Apex Warlord stepped forward to humiliate her, she took just one step. What happened next silenced the galaxy, shattered pride, and changed everything. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. You thought strength was loud? Watch. What happens when silence takes a stand? The trial chamber of the celestial tribunal gleamed like a polished gemstone, filled with light, echo, and an air of quiet judgment. Every seat was taken. Delegates from over 100 species sat in perfect, concentric rings, each one waiting for the spectacle to begin. The chamber's ceiling, so high it disappeared into mist, seemed to press down on the platform at the center, where a single human stood, quiet, still, and alone. Luma Breen didn't move. She didn't need to. Her silence had already caused more disturbance than shouting ever could. She stood straight, arms calmly at her sides, chin lifted but not defiant. Her expression showed nothing. No fear, no arrogance, no emotion at all. It was this calm that made the watching crowd uneasy. Across the galaxy, humans had been called unpredictable, dangerous, even wild. But this human, this one was too still, and that made her dangerous in a different way. The prosecutor, a tall being with 4 eyes and skin the color of wet stone, stepped forward. His name was Veltron Vorn, and his voice carried the thick accent of the Ceravax elite. Honorable judges, he began, today we gather to face the facts. This human, this Luma Breen, has violated not 1 or 2 laws per dos, but 32, across 8 planetary systems. Gasps and murmurs followed his words. The crowd was eager for drama, and Veltron knew how to give it to them. She destroyed sacred property. She interfered with licensed interspecies trade. She used unauthorized physical force in a restricted diplomacy zone. And worst of all, he turned dramatically to look at Luma, who didn't blink. She caused emotional embarrassment to a senior Apex trade ambassador during peak negotiation hours. A chuckle ran through the audience. It was hard not to find some of the charges ridiculous, but Veltron's expression stayed serious. Embarrassment, he said firmly, is a violation of status. And in our society, status is everything. The 3 judges, pale and slow-moving, sat on their high platform in silence. One of them adjusted a sash that seemed too large for its shoulders. Another clicked a control panel, and a series of floating drones began to hum softly, scanning Luma's heart rate, temperature, and facial movements. Her vitals barely changed. Her calm was unnatural. Magistrate Cornell, the lead judge, spoke, finally. Human Luma Breen, you have not spoken once since your arrest. Do you choose to remain silent still? Luma said nothing. Her eyes remained on a fixed point somewhere just above the heads of the judges. Cornell nodded to the drones. Record the silence as a passive response. Continue with biometric analysis. In the upper rows, Jory-Khan, a thin, nervous alien with violet skin and long fingers, leaned closer to his neighbor. She's not like the others, he whispered. She doesn't react. She's a death worlder, his neighbor replied. They're built different. Gravity makes them stronger, pressure makes them quieter. Veltron continued reading the charges one by one, each more complex than the last. The more he spoke, the more the chamber began to shift from amusement to tension. No one had expected the human to stand so still. No one had expected her silence to speak so loudly. She tackled 3 registered slavers through a ceremonial market stand, Veltron said. She caused structural damage to 5 displays, including a religious crystal tower believed to contain the memories of the departed. His tone shifted to anger, and she did so knowing full well that she had no jurisdiction, no clearance, and no diplomatic shield. Were the slavers arrested? Asked a voice from the back. It was faint, but clear. Veltron's head turned sharply. That is not the issue here. The issue is process. She acted outside of protocol. She acted human. Again, Luma did not react, but her stillness was no longer ignored. Now, it was studied. The audience had expected a show of emotions, wild arguments, or loud denials. Instead, they received a statue that stood alone in the storm of accusations. Magistrate Cornell leaned forward. Human Luma Breen, your continued silence will allow the court to interpret your biological responses as your answers. Do you understand this? Luma's only response was a slow blink. Then let it be recorded, Cornell said, almost reluctantly. The defendant does not deny the charges. Proceed with evidence. The hologram blinked to life in the center of the chamber, showing a recreated scene of the market square. Bright colors danced in the air as the simulation played, a poor imitation of real events. It showed Luma too tall, too violent, too red-eyed to be believable. The slavers were made to look gentle. The children who had cried in fear were shown smiling. It was a lie. Still, Luma said nothing. Among the watchers, one by one, opinions began to shift. If the prosecution had the truth, why change the details? Why exaggerate her? Beltran turned from the hologram, clearly proud. This, he said, is what your galaxy faces if we allow undisciplined species like humans to continue interfering. She is not a hero. She is a threat. The silence in the chamber deepened, not out of agreement, but out of thought, and still Luma Breen stood still, her eyes calm, her breathing even. A storm was rising, but she had not yet stepped into it. Not yet. The doors of the tribunal chamber hissed open with theatrical slowness, drawing every eye toward the entrance. A ripple of sound moved through the crowd, a wave of whispers, clicks, and blinking lights. Something, or someone, important, had arrived. Standing in the doorway was a figure that towered over even the tallest species present. He wore thick ceremonial armor covered in ribbons and emblems, polished to a mirror shine. His skin was a deep metallic blue, his head crest glowing with embedded lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. This was Commander Jeth Relkor, war hero of the Apex Worlds, a living legend who had never lost a challenge. Jeth's heavy boots echoed across the floor as he strode to the center of the chamber without asking permission. Behind him trailed a team of aides, all struggling to keep up. The judges whispered among themselves but did not stop him. No one wanted to be the one to interrupt a decorated Apex commander. His reputation preceded him. He had fought battles that ended rebellions. He had stood on battlefields where others had fallen, and now, here he was demanding to speak at a trial many had dismissed as a formality. I come not only as an observer, he announced, his voice booming through the chamber, but as the appointed champion of Ambassador Varen, who was humiliated during this human's reckless display. He turned to face Luma Breen, still silent on her platform. This creature may look calm, but inside it is chaos. Dangerous, uncontrolled, a threat to the dignity of our galaxy. Magistrate Cornell adjusted his robes nervously. Commander, Relkor, your presence is highly irregular. This situation, Jeth interrupted, has become irregular. The trial is no longer a simple list of charges. It is a matter of galactic pride. Veltran Vorn, the prosecutor, narrowed his eyes at the interruption. He had been enjoying the spotlight, and this war hero's dramatic entrance was stealing his moment. Still, he bowed slightly. Of course, Commander. Your testimony is welcome, as is your perspective. Jeth walked in slow circles around Luma's platform, his voice rising and falling like a practiced performer. I have studied Deathworlders. I have read their history. Their biology is backward. Their worlds are violent. Their cultures are built on chaos. They lift rocks and punch machines because they cannot think their way through problems. He stopped in front of Luma, looking down at her. And yet, they are not ashamed. They wear their brutish strength like a badge. They laugh too loudly. They fight too easily. And when they are told to follow the rules, they do this. He gestured dramatically to her silence. Luma didn't move. Her face remained unreadable. She says nothing because she has no defense, Jeth declared. Because silence is her only weapon left. In the crowd, some nodded, agreeing. Others weren't so sure. A Deluni scholar named Sari Menvin scribbled notes on her glowing pad, her wide eyes studying every movement. She had come to observe legal proceedings, but she was beginning to think she was witnessing history. The judges, unsure how to proceed, turned again to Veltran. He activated a large holographic display in the center of the chamber. To clarify what the human has done, he said, we offer a visual simulation of the incident in question. The hologram shimmered into life. It showed a peaceful alien market, clean and colorful, where smiling merchants handed out gifts. The slavers were shown as kind-faced traders. The children appeared happy. Luma, however, was monstrous, at least 2 feet taller than reality, glowing red eyes, fists clenched like weapons. The entire scene was a cartoon, obviously exaggerated, but designed to stir fear. The audience reacted in waves. A few laughed at the absurdity. Others leaned forward, drawn in by the drama. Jeth Relkor crossed his arms, pleased with the show. She sees herself as a hero, he said, but this footage shows the truth. A being who acts on instinct, not reason. An animal dressed in human skin. Still, Luma did not react. In a far corner of the chamber, Officer Yen Tavros, a mid-ranking security guard, frowned. He had reviewed the original footage before the trial. It hadn't looked anything like this. The slavers were aggressive. The children had screamed. The destruction happened when Luma had thrown herself between harm and helplessness. Now, watching this version, he felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't justice. It was a show. Back, on the main floor, Beltran stepped aside. The simulation is conclusive. She endangered the safety of a diplomatic world, damaged priceless relics, and embarrassed a key figure in the Apex Council. And through it all, Jeth added, she has remained silent. Why? Because she has nothing to say, nothing of value to offer. She is not a leader. She is a reminder of everything the galaxy has outgrown. At that, the room went quiet. The judges leaned in. The crowd watched. Everyone waited to see if Luma would finally break her silence. She didn't, but her eyes met Jeth's for the first time. A subtle shift in posture. Nothing aggressive, just awareness. It was the kind of stillness that comes before something unexpected. A quiet moment stretched between them, like a string pulled too tight. Sari Menvin noted the tension. Something is changing, she whispered to herself. Something important. And though Luma had not spoken a word, the story had already begun to shift in the minds of those watching. Not through force, not through argument, but through the weight of calm in the face of noise. The Apex stood tall in his armor, but a shadow had been cast, long and silent. The tension in the tribunal chamber was so heavy it felt like gravity itself had thickened. Luma Breen hadn't moved in over an hour. She stood with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that time could be an ally. Around her, 100 different species watched with silent breath. The floating drones continued scanning her vitals, but the data they sent back made no sense to the analysts. Heart rate steady, stress indicators low, eyes focused, but calm. She was, by every measure, not afraid. Commander Jeth Relkor paced like a lion in a cage. The silence had started to bother him. He was used to fear. He expected anger, denial, or at least a desperate protest. But the human gave him nothing. It made his teeth clench. He wasn't just here for justice. He was here to prove a point. The Apex species ruled for a reason, and Luma's behavior had placed a crack in that belief. I've had enough, he announced, stepping toward her platform. The judges tried to object, but he didn't stop. His boots clicked loudly against the polished floor, each step louder than the last. He stepped right up to the platform and looked down at her. You think silence makes you strong? He said. You think standing still makes you right? No. You are just another animal pretending to be civilized. Luma said nothing, but her eyes met his again. Steady, unflinching. Jeth's voice grew louder. I've fought creatures 3 times your size. I've crushed rebels with one hand. Your kind doesn't scare me. One of his gloved fingers pointed directly at her chest, just shy of touching her. You hide behind stillness, but I see you. You're just waiting to fall. The room was absolutely quiet. Luma moved. It wasn't a leap. It wasn't a punch. It was a single step. One deliberate motion forward. But in that instant, physics took over. Under the constant pull of Earth's high gravity, her muscles were dense, efficient, and powerful in a way the apex species had never needed to be. Her frame had been still, not out of fear, but because it had been holding energy like a spring. Her shoulder brushed against Jeth's chest armor. He didn't fall. He flew. The courtroom gasped in collective disbelief as the decorated war hero was launched into the air. His armor clattered, his metals jangled, and his boots left the floor as if gravity had forgotten its rules. He sailed backward in a slow, almost graceful arc before crashing into the prosecutor's podium, scattering tablets and paperwork in every direction. He didn't get up right away. The silence that followed was different, not tense, not expectant. It was stunned. Even the floating jellyfish-like diplomats from Virali turned purple with surprise, their bioluminescent tendrils trembling. The tiny Miblin observers stopped scribbling notes. One dropped its recording device in shock. Luma returned to stillness. She hadn't even changed her expression. Her hands had stayed at her sides. Her breathing remained calm. If not for Jeth, Relkor groaning on the floor, it would have been hard to believe anything had happened at all. Next time, she said quietly, don't confuse silence with weakness. The words hung in the air like thunder after a flash of lightning. It was the first time she'd spoken since the trial began. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the chamber like a blade slicing through fog. The medical drones zipped down, hovering over the fallen commander. One of them beeped loudly as it analyzed the damage: fractured ribs, bruising, a dislocated shoulder, and what the translation system labeled as significant emotional distress. Veltran Vorn stood frozen beside the wreckage of his podium. His tablet blinked red, listing damage costs, insurance claims, and new medical reports. For once he had no words. In the upper rings, the spectators began to shift uncomfortably. Whispers turned into open conversations. The Miblin legal analyst waved its oversized legal book and declared, per Regulation 12B, subsection 14, the war commander violated courtroom distance codes first. Sari Menvin, the Deluni scholar, was already writing a paper in her mind. Death World Kinetics, the unseen power of patience. One of the judges finally spoke, his voice cracking from disbelief. This court will recess for further review, immediate review, urgent review. In the corner, the Harundi betting syndicate exploded into noise. Their spiny bodies bristled with excitement. The odds they'd set against the human had just flipped, and anyone who bet on her now held a small fortune. Jeth Relkor was helped to his feet by 3 aides. His face showed not pain, but something worse: confusion. It was the look of someone who had never lost and now didn't understand how it had happened. The crowd continued to murmur, and in every whisper was a shift, a turning. The story of Luma Breen was no longer about crime or judgment. It was about the moment a human reminded the galaxy that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. As Luma stood once more in silence, she no longer looked small on the platform. She looked like gravity itself. News of the trial spread across the galaxy faster than light could travel. Before the end of the day, nearly every known species had seen the footage. Luma Breen, a quiet human from a harsh planet, had faced one of the most feared Apex warriors and sent him flying with a single, perfect step. No weapons, no anger, just one deliberate movement. Across star systems, millions rewatched the clip over and over, trying to understand how someone so calm could be so powerful. On a small teaching vessel orbiting a moon in Sector 9, a Deluni instructor named Dea Lorne played the trial footage for her class. The students, young beings of various species, sat in silence as they watched the moment again. When the video ended, one student raised a shimmering blue limb and asked, "Did she mean to attack him?" Dea smiled softly. She meant to end the conversation. Across the stars, Luma's story became more than news. It became a lesson. Commentators debated what her silence had meant. Writers called it the stillness that spoke louder than words. Scientists broke down the physics of her step, publishing endless articles about human muscle density, reaction speed, and the power of gravity. Artists made sculptures of her pose. Musicians sampled the sound of her step and turned it into a beat. Even the culinary sector got involved. A popular drink on a trade hub was renamed Gravity Grace, a bitter shot that hit hard and fast. At the tribunal, the judges had no choice. The charges against Luma Breen were quietly dismissed under an old legal clause that had never actually been used before: exemptions due to disproportionate provocation in undefined diplomatic scenarios. No one even knew what it meant, but it allowed them to close the case without admitting defeat. Commander Jeth Relcor, bruised and embarrassed, disappeared from public view. His team issued statements blaming courtroom design, gravity irregularities, and even a malfunction in his balance sensors, though he had no such implants. But the truth had already taken root. He was no longer a symbol of apex strength. He had become a meme. Across hundreds of planets, his mid-air stumble was frozen in endless posters, joke cards, and digital stickers. On more than one occasion, children challenged each other to reenact the step and see how far they could send their friends flying. It wasn't mockery. They just couldn't stop watching that perfect, quiet moment of power. The Imperium, recognizing the public shift, changed its tone. A new diplomatic effort was launched focused on human engagement. Suddenly, Terran representatives were being invited to science summits, trade conventions, and cultural exchanges. The reason was clear. The galaxy had underestimated Earth, and now they were eager to understand what they had missed. For Luma, none of this mattered. After the trial, she boarded a shuttle back to her original post, a quiet agricultural station orbiting Proxima 3. There were no celebrations, no interviews, just a message from her superior officer that read, "Next time, try not to fix everything with your feet." She smiled at that. In the weeks that followed, requests poured in. Some were from young cadets wanting training. Some came from alien scholars hoping to visit Earth for observational purposes. A few were strange. One merchant offered to name an asteroid after her, while a music group wanted to create a ballet based on her courtroom step. She ignored them all. The story continued without her, as good stories do. Others told it, reshaped it, and passed it on. In some versions, she was a hero. In others, a symbol. One group called her a walking force of nature. Another claimed she was secretly trained in forbidden martial arts. None of them really knew the truth. What most didn't realize was that Luma hadn't stepped forward to prove anything. She had done it because someone needed to. The courtroom was built to intimidate, the system designed to silence those who didn't fit the mold. She hadn't planned to fight, but when the moment came, her stillness had turned into motion, not out of rage but out of duty. Far from the court, in a garden beneath twin suns, Dea Lorne's class continued their discussion. A curious student, with scales that shimmered like fish skin, asked quietly, "Do you think she was brave?" Dea looked toward the sky and said, "She was more than brave. She was still. In a world that wants us to shout, she showed us how to listen. And when the moment came, she didn't shout back. She stepped forward." Another student raised a paw. "Will she come back?" Dea's smile widened. "I think she never left, not really. Anyone who stands quiet in the face of noise, who waits until the right moment to act, carries her spirit." And so, in classrooms, in stories, in quiet corners of the galaxy, the tale of Luma Breen remained. Not as a tale of battle, but a reminder. Sometimes gravity is not just a force that holds us down. Sometimes it's the grace that lifts us up.